Hey all, let's talk a bit about the Brewmaster spec tree changes that were released roughly around the time the beta build was released on PTR. If you like presentations and infographics, then this is the place for you. If you haven't seen my previous video, use the legend below to understand how the skills cluster together. And now for those changes. There was a slight shuffling of the choice node, shadowboxing treads, fluidity of motion, with facepalm on the tree. This doesn't do a whole bunch, but if you were looking to go heavy into that brew style of play, it does add an additional point that you'll have to spend before making it to facepalm, which of course gives you that small brew cooldown. Practically, does it do anything? It might, as you have 12 points to spend in the mid tier before transitioning to that lower third of the tree. You're not really going to go back and spend any more points once you hit that third. If we look at the 21 places we have the spend points, well, realistically it's 17 if you subtract those 2-point nodes. But if it does, you have that 12 points for 17, so it could give you a bit more pressure to put those points towards the edges of the tree as opposed to pathing more towards the middle. Next up, we'll talk about the less interesting pathing options that were added. Celestial Flames to Breath of Fire. Thematically that makes sense. And Clash to the optional Shadowboxing Treads Fluidity of Motion choice node. This takes those optional dead ends and connects them to the lower part of the mid tier. By creating those nodes, it does break a bit from the optionality of them by placing them in a similar grain as everything else on the nodes. And what I mean by that is, before they were distinctly an endpoint in which you would pick if you want that specific thing. Now, because of that lower leg, you can path through them, therefore creating an upward dependency where there was not one to begin with. This is an interesting branch change for a few reasons. The first is that it puts more emphasis on the outside of the tree, I alluded to that earlier, and reduces the value of the healing elixir node from a decision point as the branches of it become less valuable. Previously, Healing Elixir and the side nodes, Hit Scheme and the choice node Rushing Jade Wind Special Delivery, both had 2 available paths from them. When we look at what they were, Healing Elixirs was slightly more prohibitive from a pathing perspective, as its options were the 2 paths that led to the 2-point speed bump nodes. When contrasted with the side nodes, which had 3 paths, one to the speed bump, and then one to a defensive, and then lastly to that optional dead end node. However, what the Healing Elixir node did provide, even though the pathing wasn't as great, is it allowed a bridge between both those mirrored sides of the tree. Lastly, those outside paths now give you a viable way to avoid picking any of those internal defensive nodes. It's now possible to avoid Celestial Brew and Zen Meditation. I'm not sure why you would do that, but you could. Another way to think of it is that you can now reach the edge offensive abilities without pathing through a defensive cooldown, but instead pathing through a utility or a defensive passive. Hey, but it's a choice, and choices are good. Does it really matter? Not really. From a points of power perspective, you are grabbing both those edge talents. It does, however, highlight an opportunity to change the way we think of Quicksip and Gifted the Ox talent nodes. That might make sense for those nodes to either be situationally viability nodes or alternative playstyle nodes. For example, shifting Healing Elixir with Quicksip makes it a bit more intuitive that Gifted the Ox and Healing Elixir play a similar role as they share similar slots in the talent tree. The more meaty changes are the additional connections they added into the lower third of the tree. First, the additions of Walk with the Ox to Bone Dust Brew, and Elusive Brawler to Weapons of Order. These are nice little changes that allow an easier cross-tree path to the capstones. By allowing that path in the lower third, you, in theory, allow the player to choose everything on one side of the tree and then freely path to the opposite capstone in that lower third. In addition, it provides player choice in how you reach those capstones as opposed to locking them behind a specific 2-point speed bump node. Again, does this matter? I think so. I think choice is good. So being able to choice from 2 separate nodes to a single node is always going to be better from a player choice perspective. In addition, it allows you to loosen up what you pick in that mid-tier because you have multiple paths now to go down. Now the last change, which is the outside legs in the third tier. Dragonfire Brew, Charred Passions choice node to Bone Dust Brew, and then Counter-Strike to Weapons of Order. These two new legs provide a slight change in philosophy by allowing you to reach the capstones without going through a 2-point speed bump. This means you can reach the capstone in 3 points instead of the previous 4. Again, is that a bad thing? Maybe. It makes the player choice no longer about those 3 capstone nodes, but instead revolve around more of those 2-point speed bump nodes, and then sort of emphasizing the value pathing on the edge. Again, kind of highlighting the edge being the quick path down now. The end results of the third tier pathing changes is that you can now snag all 3 capstones, when before you could only get 2. From a design perspective, we shifted our choice away from the capstones and more about the path to the capstones. For example, what 2-point center node should I use to get to Stormstout's last keg, while keeping in mind that it also opens up one of the other capstones? And then, are the 2 outside talents worth more to me than one of the 2-point nodes? Those are the questions now about pathing that we keep in mind are more impactful than the choice to the capstones. Thank you for listening, and with that, I release you back to the wild.